Hello, and thank you for tuning in to Starting Small. Today, I'm joined by Cameron Forbes of Forbes Functions. Cameron, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, so to kick things off, I'd like to start out with your upbringing. Where did you grow up, and what would you say your childhood was like?
Yeah, so I was New York City born and raised. I grew up really immersed in the world of events from a young age. My mother is a florist. My grandmother was like a lifelong entertainer and hostess. So from as early as I can remember, I was taught kind of the value of a beautiful table, a welcoming home, how to do floral arrangements, and I grew up spending, most of my year in the city, going to school here, and then spending my summers out in the Hamptons, which gave me, I think, early exposure to the beautiful entertaining out there, and also
Mm.
kind of just instilled a love for gathering and bringing people together in me.
Yeah.
And so that was kind of my upbringing in the city. And I went to two small private schools. I went to an all girls school that's called Nightingale and a co ed school called Riverdale. And throughout kind of high school, I was always the master of ceremonies for my friends. And, whenever anyone was having a birthday or planning a graduation party, I was always the person that was kind of tapped of, can you make an invite on Canva, or can you help us do some flower arrangements? So kind of has always been a passion of mine since I was little.
Yeah. I mean, like growing up as a kid with, especially your mom in that background of like floral, what did your interests and kind of pursuits look like at that time? Like, would you help her on projects or like what were you doing as a kid growing up?
Yeah, I mean, she definitely always got my sister and I really involved. And so
Mhm.
whether it was helping her with arrangements or, while she was arranging, can you guys set the table for dinner? Can you guys help me work on these invites?
Mm.
So I think from a young age, she really wanted us to feel engaged, and that really got me into it. And as I said, and as I kind of got older, I was able to take on kind of bigger parts of the process. So
Mhm.
my mom being a lifelong hostess and a florist, she would have events, throughout the summer. And, it went from, can you help me with the table settings to, okay, can you call the rental company, and kind of slowly just like building up kind of my familiarity there.
Mm. Incredible. So I saw you went on to study at Duke. At this time, what did you study, and then why did you go to Duke as well at that time?
Yeah, so I mean, I think growing up in the city, I had grown up on the Upper East Side. I think, a lot of people say about New York City, you grow up really fast, which is definitely
Mhm.
true. And I think having spent my entire life in New York, I was like, I have never been to a small town. I've never spent any time outside of the East Coast. So I went to Duke honestly for a change, because I was kind of like, when else in my life am I going to be living in Durham, North Carolina, and kind of have
Yeah.
that slower pace of living? And so I went to Duke, and at Duke, I studied, interestingly enough, I majored in history, and then I also majored in marketing and business management.
Mm.
So I have a love of storytelling, which I think comes through my events from history, and then
Yeah.
also got more of kind of the practical side of my other major. And even at Duke, I was, very involved in the event scene, whether it was putting on like different student events. I was in a couple different clubs that would do events. And then, in my sorority, I was the social chair. I was planning all the different formals and mixers and trips. And so again, just kind of naturally settled into that role.
Yeah. No, incredible. So a lot of guests I've had on the podcast, a lot of them like they'll go to school, they have no idea if they're going to become like an entrepreneur or create the company that they created, but you're so immersed, especially at a young age, and then like during school. I'm curious at that time, like what did the aspiration look like that you wanted to do? Because I know you got into banking on the banking side for a little bit, but what did that look like when you were in school? Did you know you were
Yeah.
going to get into
So when I
events?
was in school, I was really fortunate, again, having grown up in the city. I would come back here every summer. And so all kind of 4 summers of college, I worked at different PR firms. And that
Hmm.
was kind of my first exposure to events in like a professional setting. So
Hmm.
doing brand events. And one of the companies I worked for, they did all the events for LMVH. So they did like the Vofico Polo Classic and lots of just different fun events throughout the summer.
Hmm.
And so working there, I kind of knew throughout college that I wanted to go into the event side of PR. And then, I kind of just had the wonderful luck of graduating college amidst a global pandemic.
Hmm.
So the job offer I had for my PR firm was rescinded. They weren't hiring anyone. They were laying people off. And, no event
Wow.
firms were hiring. They were all kind of shutting down. So because the other half of my major kind of fit in with banking and business management, I ended up working at B of A and worked in their experience design division. So on a lot of the Bank of America, like online and mobile products, so like the Zelle app and other apps they
Mm.
have.
Yeah.
So again, like still kind of getting a little bit of that design, but I think, I knew early on in my job there that, I loved my team, but it wasn't really where I was meant to be and it wasn't my
Mm.
calling. So after a year of working at B of A out of college, I started Forbes Functions really just as a side hustle
Mm.
where I was doing events for friends, friends of friends, warm connections I had. And really, it was just, working in banking during the week, having crazy hours, and then
Wow.
every weekend, throwing different events for people so I could start getting my hands dirty and build up a portfolio. And so I started the business in June 2022. I was
Mm.
23, so very young,
Wow.
and was on two different tracks with the banking and with the events. And then within around kind of 9 or so months, it had gotten to the point where I'd grown our socials. I had worked with a couple different VIPs, influencers in the city, and I was actually able to leave my job at Bank of America and take the company full time.
Incredible.
And then since then, that was March 2023. Since then, it was just a team of one. It was me. Since then, I've now grown to a team of six, all women under 30. And I think
Wow.
having an all female team is also something that is really important to me.
Mhm.
And so that's kind of, the growth and the start of it. And it's just been really amazing to see, the momentum we've had in just 3 years.
That's incredible. I'm curious, at what point did you realize like the turning point where you could leave your job at B of A to do this full time? Like as far as like scale, what did it look like? As many like events, how many events were you doing, would you say?
Yeah. So, I mean, there was honestly a moment where I was sitting, at my old apartment in 2023 in, I think, March, because I quit my job March or April.
Mhm.
And I was looking at our calendar for the summer, and it was like I had one or two events in the Hamptons every single week of the summer
Wow.
from June 1st through, September 15th.
Mhm.
And I was honestly just like, there's no way I'm going to be able to do all of this. And it
Mhm.
was, again, with having that many events on the calendar, we were also hitting a kind of tipping point where it was like, okay, this is a viable business. I'm making a lot of money now.
Yeah.
And so, again, it's always a leap of faith, leaving a nice, stable job in banking. But I took
Mhm.
that leap and then, it's ended up really working out. And, I've been able to grow my team and grow my business and continuing to take on, larger events.
Mhm.
And so that's been really exciting.
That's awesome. So to the listeners out there, can you paint like a picture as without the team yet? So like in the early days, like what does that look like logistically to plan an event that you're doing as far as Forbes functions, like working with vendors? If you can kind of like give us that
Yeah.
picture.
So early days is I would say I was super scrappy. So,
Mhm.
for example, one of the first events I did for somebody who wasn't a friend of a friend that was like my first, I think I got a DM from somebody.
Mm.
I was literally, it's me. I had a Hulken bag, if you know those. There you can use to tote like
Yeah.
groceries and things. Literally like me carrying, me getting into an Uber with tons of boxes in my Hulken and bringing all this stuff and like me alone setting up, rentals for 25 people and setting up a
Wow.
dinner for 25 on my own. So like a lot of definitely, blood, sweat and tears.
Hmm.
And so in the early days, yeah, it was really just like I was doing everything myself. It was a lot of manual labor, and it definitely just everything took a lot more time.
Yeah.
And then as I grew the team, and I also just was able to refine, my processes, my workflow.
Hmm.
Now we have a much smoother approach.
Yeah.
In the early days, I think no matter what kind of business you're starting, the early days are always going to be you're getting your hands dirty, and you kind of
For
have
sure.
to do that. And that's always my advice whenever I talk to, younger creatives who want to start something. I'm like, you just got to start building a portfolio, building
Mhm.
clients, get your hands dirty. And I think a lot of people spend a lot of time thinking like, okay, how do I start this? And it's like, don't even think, how do I start this? Just start
Yeah.
it and you'll figure it out as you go along.
For sure. For sure. Growing at like that stage where it was just yourself, I'm curious, getting into that first hire, like what turning point was it as far as like growing the company at that point? Was it just scaling as many events as possible? Was it focusing on specific events that like really moved the needle for you? What did
Yeah,
that
I
look
think
like?
with my first hire, it was really, we were getting larger events, the events were scaling. And
Mhm.
I think as I, with my first hire was kind of where I started to build the kind of foundation of my actual business that it is today in
Mhm.
terms of like setting up a lot of the like invoicing processes, contracting processes. One of the first things I did, one of my first hires was a business manager because
Mm.
I am a creative at heart. I am not, numbers. I worked at Bank of America. That is not my jam.
Yeah.
And so, I think it was really important for me to hire someone and create like a great foundation of a team where it was like now, instead of being reactive in hiring, I'm able to be really proactive and, look ahead and be like, okay, Fashion Week's gonna be pretty busy.
Hmm.
We're gonna reach out to these people and get some extra hands.
Yeah.
So I think, really laying that foundation, and my first team member, Caroline, who actually unfortunately just left, she, I think, really helped me with, creating a lot of the processes, systems, things that we
Mhm.
have in place today. And, I think also just, it's always better to have, two heads is just way better than one. So I
Yeah.
think, you know, as have grown the team, it's also just has really benefited everyone creatively because having a bunch of event planners that have different specialties. So we have planners that specialize in weddings. We have
Mm.
planners that specialize in brand. We have planners that specialize in like corporate and conferences. It just brings so many different ideas. And I think, that's to the benefit of our clients.
Yeah. No, for sure. As far as retaining new clients, for example, like what are you finding works best? I'm sure heavy word of mouth, but also I know you guys have an amazing content machine as well. So what works well for you guys?
Yeah, I mean, it is truly, it's really wild to me. And as someone who's really young in the industry, I'll talk to my peers who have been in the industry for 10, 20 years, and
Hmm.
they'll ask me, how did Hulu find you or how did this brand find you? And the answer, honestly, 50% of the time is TikTok or Instagram, which
Yeah.
is mind blowing because, when I tell my dad that, we're getting, $100,000 events off of TikTok, he's shocked, but that's how people are, using it as a search engine nowadays.
Yeah.
People aren't, just Googling my event planner. They're looking on TikTok. They want to see the visuals. They want to see the Instagram and see kind of the showcase of everything. So we
Hmm.
definitely get a lot through social and then definitely word of mouth as well.
Yeah.
Again, having grown up in the city, New York City, it can really feel like a small town if you've grown up here and if you know a ton of people. So
Yeah.
I think, I'm really fortunate that I'm operating my business in the city I grew up in. I have a ton of, great connections in my network here.
Hmm.
And then, we are always, as you said, always, pushing out content, always doing different collaborations, always working with different influencers just to
Hmm.
continue to grow our community.
Yeah. As far as like the content itself on socials, what do you guys try to focus on as that you're putting out there? I'm curious.
Yeah, I mean, I think for us, it's kind of half and half.
Mhm.
I view Instagram as like a portfolio,
Yeah.
because it tends to be kind of the first place that clients go when they're thinking about working with us. So TikTok, I think of a little bit more raw, and that's where
Mhm.
I can get educational and I can, just film a TikTok of myself, like here are the top 3 things you need to throw a Christmas party.
Yeah.
Whereas Instagram, I use more as like a living portfolio of my work. So that's like the beautiful, pretty pictures. And I think, that's worked really well for us because we've seen, people love on Instagram just like the visuals and everything. And then on TikTok, they love seeing more of the behind the scenes of here's a team setting up, here's a day
Yeah.
in my life as an event planner. And another big source for us is also Pinterest, because
Mhm.
it's really big in the events and wedding community.
Yeah. So, I mean, a lot of our listeners here are either like founders or entrepreneurs or business owners, but a lot of them are running events as well, and they know how much like goes into it. As far as like hiring someone like an event planner who can like really make their event next level, what does that look like? As far as like an onboarding process, say a new client comes on board, what does that relationship look like once you start planning?
Yeah, so with us, I mean, it really we try to tailor our client experience to fit, whoever we are working with best. So, there are
Mhm.
some clients who want to have a weekly meeting and, want to get a daily email update, and then there are other clients who, will be like, "Here is the credit card. I want to take more of a step back." And
Mhm.
so we really work either way. But I think at the end of the day, how we work is we're really soup to nuts. We are, you can call us when your event is a year away and all you have is the twinkle in your eye,
Yeah.
and we handle everything from the event design and concepting all the way up to like the day of production and breaking down and like post event.
Mm.
So I think that is really great, and it's also just really exciting to be able to see. That's my really part of the job is seeing those events come to life.
Yeah.
And so normally with clients, they'll come to us, we'll have an intake call where, we'll talk about the event venue, what are the goals of the event? What is the guest count? What is the aesthetic? What is the budget? And then normally my team will send over a proposal to a client. And then, we are either they're passing on that or we're working together. And then from there, as I said, it really depends on the client, but we basically are, by your side throughout the event process. And
Mm.
we help coordinate and pull and manage all the different vendors, venues, all the different kind of stakeholders.
Yeah.
we like to say that to our clients, like, we want to take all the weight off their shoulders, and we want them to be able to focus on the day of their event, like doing their hair and makeup, getting a
Yeah.
cocktail. You don't need to be running around doing sound check 5 minutes before your own event.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, as far as like the level of events that you guys run, so like maybe small, medium, large, like what does the team need look like to run something like that logistically? So like an event like for like Hulu, for example, I'm sure there's a lot of logistics. So like what does your team like build out look like behind an event?
Yeah, I mean, so our build out behind an event, I mean, there, as you said, it's like there are so many things that go in place for the event. So,
Yeah.
for example, we just did a foundation launch last Thursday. And if you went to it, you were like, "Oh, this is so adorable." It's like an outdoor cocktail party and then a seated dinner.
Mm,
But like what you don't realize is that it's like, okay, the entire tablescape is matched to the 26 new shades of the foundation.
wow.
And we have the projections of all the new model imagery and the foundation shades, and all of, the menu is informed by the ingredients in the foundation.
Wow.
So there's a lot of behind the scenes people don't see. And I think, we have a lot of tools that we use. So I'm a stickler for a run of show. Like, we have our run of show in like 15-minute increments down to the wire. I always have like my run of show, like a basic timeline, an inventory list, a contact list for all our vendors. We normally do mock-ups of like what the displays will look like. We'll do floor plans. So I definitely am someone where I'm like, I want to come to the venue super prepared, and so everyone
Mm,
knows what they're doing.
yeah.
And I
Uh,
think, obviously I'm biased as an event planner, but as someone who also, I go to a lot of brand events in the city, and I go to a lot of events in general.
mhm,
I can tell when there has been an event planner involved, or when someone has put prep and thought into it, because
mhm.
you can just tell when the host is running around, and you can tell they're stressed. Oh, the playlist isn't working. Oh, this person
Yeah.
didn't drink. It rubs off on the guests. And as a
Mm,
host, you never want, if you're having an event for your business, you never want the guests to be like, "Oh, wow, she was so stressed the entire night. I didn't even get to talk to her."
yeah. That's a
Especially,
great point.
if it's a big brand launch or activation. So that's why, I personally am always like, hire somebody so you can actually, number one, enjoy yourself, but
Yeah.
also it'll show to your guests you're going to be able to be more present and more
Mhm.
involved and just more engaged.
Yeah, no, for sure. So I saw a stat like you guys are growing exponentially, so like 250% year over year. As far as that like goes, what would you grant some of that success of the growth to? I know like you have an amazing team, but what would you say behind that?
I mean, I think honestly, as we've been talking about, I think a big part of it is socials. I think,
Mm,
keeping that going has been huge for us. And I think, again, having a team of young planners, it really allows us to kind of have just our finger on the pulse of what's happening in the city. So I just feel like my team is very proactive, whether it's, there's a new venue that someone finds out about, we're the first email to that team. Or,
mm,
we hear that it's the 20th anniversary of this brand, like we will immediately go out and pitch them. So I think
mm,
just, really being on top of things, and, we're really hungry and are always chasing those opportunities.
yeah.
I think that's, what really has helped with the team.
Yeah, I love it. As far as like the percentages for like corporate personal events, what are you seeing? I mean, in this maybe in the past year, like you guys are contributing towards like, is it mainly corporate, a lot of weddings? What does that mix look like?
I would say right now it's close to 50-50.
Yeah.
So we do a lot of brand, corporate, creator events, and then, the other 50% I would include weddings in. And
Hmm.
those are just like any events for private clients. So any sort of milestone event, whether it's a baby shower or a bachelorette or a wedding or a
Hmm.
birthday. And that's one of the things I really love about the events industry is, no 2 days are the same and no two clients are the same.
Yeah.
And, when I started Forbes Functions, I started my company because I was like, I just felt like there weren't any young creatives in the event planning industry. And a
Mm,
lot of the firms that I had grown up with, and I had gone to the events and I had known these event planners growing up, were in their 50s and 60s. And I was just feeling like everything was looking so similar. It was very cookie
mm,
cutter. And, my goal for functions was, our clients should never get the same treatment. They should never get, the same event. Everything should always be so tailored to the client.
yeah.
I think that's also led to a lot of our success.
Yeah. I love that. Looking at the future of events, especially like in this space, what are some big opportunities that you see or you're looking forward to, or you can see maybe Force Functions taking advantage of? I'm curious, kind of like what that growth and opportunity would look like.
Yeah, I mean, I just think coming out of COVID, I feel like we've all seen just how big brand events have gotten.
Yeah.
And, I think the evolution of that is I now feel like a lot of those tentpole moments throughout the year. So if you think about something like a Coachella, well, it's not just Coachella anymore. There's the 818 bar and there's Revolve
Mm,
Festival and there's all these different brand activations and pop-ups. And
yeah,
I think that people have just realized in the last few years that event marketing is a great way to get your consumers involved. And I think, people are trusting influencers less and less. And so
mhm,
being able to, have your customers on site, in a physical location, being able to interact with your products, interact with your team is so meaningful.
for sure.
And it just, leads to so much more conversion than anything you could
Mhm.
do, offline.
Yeah,
I mean, online. And so I really think the future of event marketing is just going to be, continuing to grow the events around those large events. So, for example, in the Hamptons, it's, July 4th has become a big weekend where,
yeah,
everyone's out there already. So it's like Surf Lodge is going to be taken over by Hampton Water, who's going to do a pop up. And then Prod is doing a pop up at the farmer's market.
yeah,
So I think, it's going to be continuing to build out around those. Same thing with like the Super Bowl. Having, I'm sure everyone saw Alex Earl was at the Super Bowl for like 4 different nights. There were all these different parties and things like that. So I think we're going to continue to see just the growth of kind of events around these big moments.
yeah. Looking back, so I mean, launching out of COVID officially, but also being kind of around the space for so long, if you can share, I'm curious, like what is like a moment or like an event that you're really proud of that the team or yourself executed really well that might have like been like a trajectory point for the business?
Yeah, I mean, I think honestly, a trajectory point that was like relatively recently is we had an NFL player reach out to us, and he had a very tight timeline to get married. He wanted to get married in New York City. He
Mm,
had a month to do it in. And, he was actively playing. He was in Germany actually 3 days before his wedding, playing in one of
wow.
the, European League games. And so that was definitely a moment for us where it was I had planned a wedding in short time periods. I'd done 3 months. I had never done 4 weeks. And
Yeah.
I think that was really a moment for us of number one, we're working with a very high profile VIP. So it
Yeah.
requires, the utmost level of discretion and, respect and everything. But number
Mhm.
two, it was also like we want to do this, but we also want to be absolutely perfect. And we only have 28 days. Whereas,
Mm,
normally we have 16 months.
yeah.
And so I think that was a big make it or break it moment for our team, and seeing, number one, how my team, everyone really rallied around each other. Everyone, nobody was not involved. But then also, that really cemented to us, I was like, if we can plan a wedding in 4 weeks, we can do pretty much anything in 4 weeks.
For sure.
And so I think that was a big moment for us of realizing, okay, wow, we really have the skill set, and we're really, we really can do almost anything at this point.
Mm,
And then I think, a little bit earlier, one of the first big really brand event I did was January 2023. So, about 9 months or whatever into the business. And
mhm.
that was we did a launch for Baked by Melissa's her cookbook that she released.
Wow.
And I think that was also, a moment where it was, the first big brand event we were doing. We did a full custom supermarket that we built out.
Mm,
And so it was, literally from the ground up, stocking shelves, creating this whole Melissa's market with a custom wall and custom totes and all these different
mm,
shoppable areas. And I think, when that went out, when that, it went with flying colors, their team was so happy. I think that's when I first started really getting into the brand events,
mm.
and, we proved ourselves there. And I think, that's allowed us to now get to a place where, we're working with other brands like Hulu or Guess or We Were What.
That's incredible. So, Cameron, I like to conclude each episode with this. Such an incredible story. If you can wrap up with one piece of advice to an inspiring entrepreneur, maybe something you've learned or regret along the way, what would you say that would be?
Oof, to any inspiring entrepreneur, I would say, I mean, I think, we've touched on this a bit, but I think in general, I am someone where I think, start before you think you're ready. You don't need to have
Yeah.
every answer to build something extraordinary. When I started Forbes Functions, it was like, I had a big bat, I had a huge tote, a bunch of candles and a dream.
Yeah,
And, you can iterate. And I think a lot of people just have this idea that, okay, before I put anything out in the world, it needs to be perfect.
for
And I
sure.
think, honestly, that's not the way to go about it, because even if it's perfect when you let it out in the world, you're going to get customer feedback and you're going to have to iterate. So you might as
Yeah.
well just start, get your hands dirty, and then iterate along the way. And I think, again, that's my advice in general to people is also, don't wait for permission, or don't wait for what you think is going to be this big moment, or, oh, if this happens, I'll do it. I think especially in creative industries, it's really driven by being bold, put your ideas out there, advocate for yourself. And I think,
Mm,
find mentors who also encourage your vision and believe in you.
incredible. Well, Cameron, thank you so much for taking the time. And to the listeners out there, make sure to check out Forbes Functions at forbesfunctions.com.